Now that the armature is done and all of the mechanisms are figured out except for the head movement, I'm going to focus my attention on making some hands. So this is 3/4 inch poplar. It's a hardwood, so it'll do really good outdoors. And I'm just drilling some holes in there and using a tap and die set to both tap the wood and then a die to use on this 1/4 inch aluminum round stock that I'll be using for the fingers. This might be overkill, but I just don't want to take any chances because I will be bending these after they're inserted in the wood. So I'm just going to use some 8-minute epoxy. I'm going to put a little bit on the threads and a little bit inside each hole, and then I'll thread each finger into the poplar. So I decided to try attaching each finger to the drill and thread it through that way, and that actually worked really well. So again, everything on this prop is just double the normal proportion, so I did the same thing for the fingers, and those black lines represent where a knuckle would be, and including the thumb. The thumb only has 2 points of movement, where all of the other fingers have 3. So I'm just going to use a blowtorch, and I'm going to mount this in a vise, and I'm going to bend each finger. You can see I've got one done. Now I'm using MAP gas. I'm not using propane. The difference between propane and MAP gas is MAP gas burns a lot hotter, so a lot of plumbers like to use it because if there's a little bit of water in the copper tubing that they're sweating, it heats up just a lot faster. So I've just always had MAP gas on hand. I use it all the time, and this makes short work of bending these. How I knew the metal was soft enough to bend easily is that black Sharpie line would basically burn off. Once it disappeared, or almost disappeared, I was relatively certain that the metal was pretty pliable. But this is aluminum as well, so it's a relatively soft metal anyway, but if you didn't heat it up and tried to bend it, you could potentially get a stress fracture. Now I'm just using a product called Liquitex Matte Medium as sort of a water, not a waterproofer, but I needed to strengthen this foam because it was really, the paint wanted to flake off really easily, and I was just afraid that if I handled this too much while I made the armature and foamed the inside of the head and everything, that the paint would have come off or I could have damaged the foam. So I just very liberally brushed this on and let it dry overnight, and it worked. It made that exterior finish of the foam a lot tougher. So now I'm just soldering some wires together. I'm going to be using 2 LEDs to light up the eyes. Now remember, this prop raises about 4 feet. It's about 10 or 11 feet tall total. So when that prop raises up, all of the air lines and all of the electrical cables have to go up with it, because my control board is going to be on the bottom of the prop near the base. So I need to make sure all of the wires are pretty solid, so I'm using some heat shrink tubing here just to cover up the solder work. And you can use either a heat gun to shrink this tubing, or you can use just the base of your soldering iron, and that'll shrink it as well. If you saw my Cauldron Creep video, then you saw how I did the eyes for the skeleton in that. So I'm basically going to do the same thing here, but everything's bigger. So these are large blue LEDs, but they have a clear lens, and they're not diffused. And because of that, it makes a big difference when you light up something like a monster eye, but in my case I'm going to use ping pong balls, and I'll show you the difference between one that is not diffused and one that is diffused, and the effect that it gives you. So here you can see the diffused bulb is on the top and the bulb right out of the package is on the bottom. What happens is that light basically comes out the front of that bulb like it's a little flashlight. So that's what it would look like in the ping pong ball. I mean, I guess it would look like it had an iris, which might be kind of cool if that's what you're going for. But you always run the risk of it not lining up the way you expect it to. And this is what it looks like with it diffused. So it looks a lot nicer, I think. So now I've just drilled a hole very carefully in the ping pong ball, and I'm using some hot glue to secure that in place. Now I've drilled a hole for the wires, and I'm just going to secure the eyes with some hot glue. I did try the blue LEDs with a white ping pong ball, and it looked okay, but they actually sell blue ping pong balls on Amazon, and something about the blue light against a blue material just really intensifies that color. So, and here is my old skeleton prop. I bought this on eBay. It was basically just an entire spinal column, and I had already used some of the vertebrae on the cauldron creep, so I'm just going to disassemble this here and scavenge, 3 or 4 vertebrae to make the neck for this prop. Now I'm just pushing this 1/4 inch threaded rod through the skull with the vertebrae on, just so I can kind of get a sense of how much rod I need, because I have to cut it to length before I foam it. I don't want to try cutting the rod afterwards and risk heating it up and having it melt the foam or anything like that. I am going to leave a little bit of the rod on top because I think I might want to make a hat for this guy, and that will just allow me to secure it so it's concealed and it doesn't fly off. Now I've just thrown a bolt and a washer on the threaded rod. I've got it secured in my vise. I'm putting all of the vertebrae on and running the power cord that will go to the LEDs through where the spinal column would go. That's kind of cool. And then I'm going to use some Locktite Foam, which is far better than Great Stuff. If you're ever doing any Halloween props or anything, do not use Great Stuff. It deteriorates over time, it's cheap, and it breaks easy, and it's yellow. This stuff is very consistent. It is absolutely rock solid when it's cured, but it's really easy to cut and sand and shape, so I highly recommend this stuff. Just be careful because it does expand quite a bit. I've got some saran wrap and tape just to protect the parts of the foam that I don't want any squeeze out to get on. So just let that cure overnight, and then I'll trim everything up, and then I'll start on the second part, or the fourth part of this build, and we'll pull everything all together.